Hey everyone, this is the Outlaw John Rocha. Thank you so much for downloading the second episode of John Rocha's Deep Cut, my new iteration of the podcast I previously had over there at Collider. I recently acquired all the audio for the previous episodes of the show, so I might drop them as classic episodes depending on what news items break or whatever the news dictates that I do. And certainly next week, I'll probably be dropping one episode a week with a currently Oscar-nominated director or creator that I was able to interview on the show last year to kind of get you hyped up for the Oscars coming up next Sunday. But one of the episodes that never aired, and we weren't able to put up because the film had not gotten distribution yet, was my interview with director Richard Stanley, who has a film out now called Color Out of Space. Some of you who are old enough to remember his work on Hardware that really announced him, but most of you probably remember him from the Island of Dr. Moreau fiasco, and then some of you might have seen the documentary Lost Soul about his experience making that film and how all the weird shenanigans and insanity that happened since. He has not directed a film in 2 decades since that film, and this is his first directing job that he has had since then, and I have to tell you, my personal opinion, he knocks it out of the park. Last week, we had 3 of the actors from that film to start off this new version of Deep Cut: Brendan Meyer, Elliot Knight, and the lovely Madeline Arthur. This week, I'm finally able to drop this episode as a new episode because it's never been heard anywhere before, and we had to hold off on it because the film hadn't had distribution by the time we recorded this, but they made him available. You know, he's out in the Pyrenees. He's on a mountain in the Pyrenees. When the publicist said, Richard Stanley is in town, would you like to interview him? I jumped at the opportunity. He was very kind to come in, and he had a lot of positive things to say about the experience, which really moved me personally. And so I am so excited to share this episode with one of the most unique, interesting, and brilliant men I've ever interviewed. You need to sit back and relax and get ready to be taken on a mental journey by Richard Stanley. Trust me, you won't regret it. All right, let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Stanley, the director of Color Out of Space. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of The Deep Cut, and one that I have been looking forward to for quite some time. As soon as we locked in our guest for today, he is one of the most interesting cats in the world of film ever, and certainly a director that I have watched for quite some time since his first feature, Hardware, and watched the documentary about him with the Island of Dr. Moreau stuff. But he has a new film out now. This one stars Nicolas Cage, and and someone who you might know from the Schmodown, Brendan Meyer. It's called Color Out of Space, and all the way from parts below us here in the United States, Richard Stanley, how are you, man?
Well, it's a pleasure being here today, so been looking forward to this.
Oh, really? Thank you, man. I've followed you and studied you for quite some time because you are just an interesting character in the world of film, as I said at the beginning here. But how are you doing? How's this all been going on for you right now with Color Out of Space and the attention it's getting?
Well, I'm totally delighted with the way Color's landing at the moment. I think people were a little bit baffled by what the hell it was when it first came out, but now they're starting to realize that it's a good time. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like it's this film about an asteroid that hits Earth. Of course, it's based on the H.P. Lovecraft novella there, but it's a purple asteroid that hits Earth and then hits this family, really, and how it affects everyone around it. What drew you to the project, and how did you get involved with this from the beginning? Well, H.P. Lovecraft's always been a part of my life. He was actually my mother's favorite author.
Oh, wow.
So I started getting the stuff from the time I was about 7 or 8.
Okay.
And I think by the time I was 13, I was already thinking about Color Out of Space. Because of all the Lovecraft stories, it's one that involves a single family and is set on a farm in New England, as opposed to being set on the moon or in the bottom of the Mariana Trench or in Antarctica.
Right.
It's actually one of the more accessible Lovecraft stories, which kind of lent it to adaptation.
Interesting. Did you made this? Now, this is the first one you've done since the whole Moreau fiasco, and there was a great documentary. I found it to be fascinating. This documentary about your relationship with that film, and so what brought you back to finally direct another film after all of that happened years ago?
Well, it was partly Lost Soul setting the record straight, because up until Lost Soul, which is the feature-length documentary by David Gregory that tells the true story of what went on behind the scenes on the original, like 1995 Dr. Moreau, people suddenly became aware of basically what had really come down. Up to then, everyone had imagined that we must have gone hog crazy and that the whole thing was completely insane, whereas, seeing it in context, they realized that it was a series of corporate maneuvers and things that simply weren't aligned in our favor at that time.
Yeah.
And it also raised a lot of questions, like on the original island of Dr. Moreau, we were experimenting with an early version of the mocap process, which absolutely nobody understood at the time. They had no clue what we were doing with sticking electrodes on people and trying to record their motion and stuff. It was so far before Guardians of the Galaxy or Planet of the Apes that I think the powers that be were left baffled by it.
Yeah.
But coming back multiple years later and seeing what was going on, there was then a curiosity to see what would happen if they allowed me to get my hand back into the digital toy box.
How interesting. So the documentary kind of got you back into people's minds and kind of let them let go of what happened and had a better idea of what had happened to you, and so they were more willing. Do you feel they were more willing to ask you to direct the film at that point? Did the doors start to open a little bit more for you?
Yeah, totally. I think people finally realized I wasn't maybe as totally insane as they thought.
Yeah, that's fair. But this one, I have to tell you, Richard, this film is so beautifully directed. It's so beautifully shot, and I just want to know, was it for you finally getting to be back in, as you said, the digital toolbox, but you also getting to be back as a filmmaker, opening the toolbox again? What was it like to be back on the set and creating this? What was it like for you?
Tremendous, and it made me regret not having made 20 more movies over the last many years.
I'm sure.
I realized by about day 3 that I actually have some kind of directing software or something hardwired into my brain, because some little voice started telling me where to put the camera next, and I just caved into that and started following what my autopilot was telling me to do. And once I started seeing the rushes from day 3 onwards, I thought, okay, we're doing good here.
Yeah.
The industry has moved on quite a lot since Moreau, but it didn't take that long to get my head around the new technology and whatever changes that happened in the interim.
I think what you say is really speaks volumes about you. You instinctually knew what to do in the situation. Technology can change, but the bones of a director are always there. And just have to find what tool they need to use for what they need to do. But the instinct is always there to do what's next and get ahead and do whatever. And it seems like that came to you as quickly as getting back on a bike or something like that.
Yeah, I think that was hardwired in some strange way.
Yeah.
And one of the big challenges was that there was not one single person on the crew or production whom I'd worked with before.
Oh, wow.
It was a completely new set of heads of departments,
Right.
new producers, so I had no prior friendships or relationships of any of them. The film was shot entirely on location in Portugal, so there was an entire Portuguese camera crew that I had to take charge of. And I think within, again, in the first week, within the first 3-4 days, once the crew started seeing the results and actually realized that we were getting good material, people started pulling together really, really well.
They started to believe in the project.
Yeah,
they
they realized that it was something special.
Right.
And then started giving 150%. So I was very pleased that we were able to take a bunch of folk who had never worked together before, and we became a very, very efficient little filmmaking machine by the end of the process.
Well, you've got some great actors on this. Of course, Nicolas Cage headlining this thing. Jolie Richardson is really just great to see her sink her teeth into a role like this, struggling with cancer, struggling with being the mom in this family. And you have Tommy Chong, Madeline Arthur. But you also had Brendan Meyer, who I've gotten to know separately, as the son. And I asked him to send me some thoughts about his experiences working with you. And he said that you really knew about every character, nuts and bolts of every character, and you gave them some guidelines and some printouts and documents about their character. Has that always been your process as a director, or did you feel you needed to put even more effort into this particular film since it's your first one since Moreau?
Well, it wasn't only that it was the first movie I'd made since Moreau. Color is the first movie I've made that directly addresses the United States of America. Every other movie I've made has been set in some weird country like Namibia or a remote tropical island, whereas this one is set in Massachusetts.
Right. In Arkham, Massachusetts.
Yeah, Arkham, Massachusetts. Yeah. Even though Arkham is a fictional area of America, it still meant there was an onus on trying to create a family who were vaguely believable.
Yeah.
And in the time we had available to us, we also needed that family unit to mesh together and interact like a real family would.
Oh, wow.
So that was a huge challenge. They say never work with children and animals. In this movie, obviously, there's a 7-year-old son, there's a family dog, there's a cat.
Right.
There's alpacas.
That's what I'm saying. Don't bury the lead. There's alpacas here.
Yeah.
How did alpacas get to be involved in this movie?
This was in part because of trying to freshen up the Lovecraft original.
Okay.
The original story from about 1926 with the meteorite hits the farm and then the alien gloop from the meteorite infects the entire farm has kind of become the basis for any number of movies since then.
The Thing is certainly a part of that, yeah.
We can see DNA from color in stuff as diverse as the Blob. It came from outer space. More recently, Annihilation borrows a few bits and pieces from it.
Right.
So it's a very familiar theme. Stephen King parodies it in the middle segment of Creepshow.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a bit of material that's been revisited by a number of different filmmakers over the years.
That's a great point. I think Tommy Knockers as well.
Yeah, Tommy Knockers as well.
And it messes the town up with everything that goes on.
We all know King was a huge Lovecraft fan, and his segment of Creepshow kind of tips his hat to the story very strongly.
Right.
So I felt an onus on trying to not do any of the things we'd seen before with the material. So I knew that we couldn't really have cows and pigs and chickens or some hick farmer come out in plaid shirt and dungarees and poke the meteor with a stick.
Right.
I figured we have to change this up. I wanted to make the family a more believable modern family.
Yeah.
And I figured, okay, let's have them as a New York-based family who have relocated to the sticks because the mum's got cancer and are trying to start a new life. And the thing that so many people do when they go through a process like that and try to start a new life in the countryside, there's nearly always some scheme.
Mm-hmm.
They nearly always think they're going to make their own wine, or they're going to have Angora goats and make Angora sweaters, or they'll have ostriches, or there's nearly always some inappropriate cash-making scheme. So alpacas came along as being, what if it was an alpaca farm?
I think it's brilliant. When I saw the alpaca, I was just like, he's really he's really doing this. He's really putting the alpacas and making them a big deal in the movie. So I was so surprised by that. And also, I thought it was a brilliant choice.
There's never been a major horror sci-fi movie using alpacas before.
Exactly.
This is the first one.
I think it's perfect. And I'm like, that totally feels like something Richard Stanley would do in all the best ways. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, they're fabulous animals as well. Really easy to work with.
Oh, really? Yeah. No problems dealing with the alpacas at all?
No problems dealing with the alpacas.
What do you have? Do you have an alpaca wrangler or an alpaca farmer? Like, who's on set for this?
We had an alpaca lady.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was one of the reasons why we ended up in Sintra, Portugal, is we were very specifically, we had to shoot in a place where alpacas were available to us.
Oh, interesting.
And we ended up with an alpaca lady who gave us huge amounts of bad advice. Almost nothing that she said was true.
Oh, wow.
I think at the off she said you have to make a marinade of alpaca excrement and paint it on everything on the set. You don't want the alpacas to eat. And we said, no, we're not going to do that.
So she was like, she had her own ideas. It was a little strange in how to approach this. How does Nick Cage get involved in a project like this? How did that come about for you?
This was part of it right from the beginning, and this came off a conversation that Nick had with the producer Josh Waller on the set of Mandy, when Nick came out as a major Lovecraft fan. And I believe he still wants to play Reanimator one day, if there's ever a Reanimator remake.
A remake with Nicolas Cage's Reanimator would be fantastic.
He's keen on that idea.
Oh, really?
The moment we realized that Nick was really hot to trot for doing some Lovecraft movies, Spectre cast around, and the Color Out of Space scripts had been floating around for a couple of years, and I grabbed it and put it in Nick's hands, and it all pretty much went like clockwork from there.
He's a massive comic book fan, so was Arkham his idea to name the town Arkham as Arkham Asylum in reference to Batman, or is that an actual town?
No, it's actually the town in the Lovecraft story.
Oh, it's called Arkham in the Lovecraft story.
Excuse
Arkham my ignorance,
is part
I didn't know
of Lovecraft's fictional New England, and in fact, the Arkham Asylum in Batman's named after the Arkham in the Lovecraft
Well,
story.
there you go. I got it backwards.
It's one of the reasons why there need to be more Lovecraft movies and why there need to be more adaptations of the core Lovecraft canon, because we're used to seeing knockoffs of the Lovecraft material and homages like Annihilation or the Arkham Asylum in Batman, but most folk don't realize what they're homaging.
Yeah,
so it's nice to see the original canon actually brought into the spotlight for a change.
Brendan also told me that you built out the front yard of this house to make it work for what you were trying to do, because it wasn't a hill or whatever it was. What's that story?
Yeah, thanks to Nick's schedule, we only had 6 weeks of prep time from the time we realized we were going to make the movie to shooting. We had 6 weeks to prepare it. And given that we had to recreate Massachusetts in Portugal, I was initially thinking we were going to have to build the main farmhouse completely. That we would have to basically create a New England-style farmhouse. So I was all geared up with the art department to find a field in the forest somewhere and then to roll up our sleeves in the 6 weeks and literally build the main location.
Interesting.
And then instead what happened was a dilapidated farmhouse from the 19th century that architecturally fit what we're looking for. That doesn't look Portuguese, doesn't have the classic Mediterranean red tiles, but actually does have the big frontage and the veranda we were looking for turned up. But it was perched on top of a hill in the middle of Sintra with no real land connected to it.
Interesting.
So we ended up saying, okay, well, we won't build the house. We'll take the house, but we'll build the land. We had to take out the valley in front of the farmhouse.
Right.
And essentially level it. And created the entire field, the well sweep, the well and the barn, and everything that the alpacas are walking on in front of the house is in fact a completely artificial stage built outside. It was all on top of a massive scaffolding.
Oh, wow.
And it also enabled us to get access to the thing from underneath the surface of the ground for lighting and operating and doing the thing that came out of the well and everything else. It gave us a lot of space to work with.
As a director, you the big thing with directing is like you want to have a voice. You want to have something to say. What do you want the film to say? What is the symbolism here that you want people to maybe take from this film and what you've done with it?
There's a bunch of layers in there, but in short, Lovecraft himself always said that all of his work strives to create an atmosphere of what he called cosmic horror, and to illustrate the frightful position of humanity in the cosmos, that we're actually pathetically weak and tiny and surrounded by vast ultra-dimensional forces of which we know nothing. So I guess the first thing was to try to create a sense of the frailty and smallness of the characters, and I knew I wanted to put characters who were weak or incapable of dealing with the situation against problems that were completely unsolvable.
Right.
So that was a big chunk of it. And some part of color is also addressing the uncertainty that people are currently feeling about the future, given that the world's environmental and political situation in the world is in complete freefall at the moment.
Yeah.
And there's a common terror about what is going to happen to our children and what is going to happen to the next generation. And what kind of world are we leaving to them?
That's certainly what I got out of it. Is this feeling of like is a statement. Well, of course, we all put in our meanings in films as we watch things. We interpret them through our own receptors, and it felt to me like what I was taking away from the film was that this thing lands and it exposes this underlying anger or frustration or fear that has been going on with all the characters that was only hinted at the first few minutes of the movie. And so it gets accentuated by this meteor landing and then what it does, what it does as they get more and more exposure to it and what it brings out in them we're seeing that now in our rhetoric and in our communications with people. And certainly this the young climate activist Greta Thunberg, who was just here, seeing people's very hard reactions or harsh reactions to her. There, she's almost like a meteor landing there and then watching everyone else react to it. I found that to be fascinating as well within the film.
It's certainly there, and color was planned for a number of years.
Yeah,
which is the really sad and scary thing about it. Like at the end of the movie, I'm not wanting to give too much away.
No, of course not. We won't spoil it.
There's a top shot which, when I see it now, reminds me very strongly of the satellite footage I've been seeing of the Amazon rainforest on fire.
Right. That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah. The film's running issue with the infrastructure projects and the environment has been something that's been floating around for a few years. But no matter how wild the ideas that we put into it, real life is worse.
Yeah.
The stuff I see on the news is always 5 steps ahead of whatever it is we're planning. We might be creating something that is inadvertently echoing the destruction of the forests. But at the same time, I look on the news and I see that it's like rained plastic in Colorado.
Yeah.
The same system that normally rains fish or frogs is now catching little bits of plastic and somehow holding them up in the jet stream so that it can actually rain plastic pieces, which is something that's worse than anything that really even happens in our movie.
Yeah.
So we're living in a world now where those kind of phenomenal events are unfortunately becoming increasingly commonplace.
Yeah. It's almost like a weird kind of modern day plague. Instead of locusts or frogs, this idea of plastic falling from the sky on us is mind blowing.
Yeah, it freaked me out when I saw that.
Yeah.
Which was a real thing. And I don't really think we actually even need World War III or an apocalypse or anything to bring us down. I think if we just continue going the way we are now, by a gradual process of attrition, things are going to become more and more infernal and more and more strange, which is kind of how color works. And as with the family and the notion of like boiling a frog and the frog staying in the pot and not hopping out because it doesn't know when that the water is getting hotter and hotter, people tend to try and go about their normal lives and go on pushing on with what they're doing, despite the fact that the sky is more or less falling on their heads. So,
right. Ignore it until you can't ignore it, and then by the time you can't ignore it, it's too late.
Yeah. So I think that was certainly one of the reasons why Lovecraft now is suddenly more popular than he's ever been before. And literally, like 100 years later, the stories are finally connecting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think there's also, within that, there's been a loss of faith in conventional Orthodox religions. Very few people at this point in time are joining orthodoxies, are wanting to become Orthodox Jews, join the Holy Roman Church, or get heavily into Orthodox Islam. The suspicion that maybe we haven't been created by an all-wise, all-kind creator deity, and that possibly some other forces at work that we don't fully comprehend.
Oh, man.
It's something that's catching on, I think, more and more with people, and it's natural that one scratching one's head going, okay, so if none of that's quite right, well, what is going on?
Right. I love that. And then that opens the door to so many things to consider and ponder through your movie. And that's what I loved about it. I really was just surprised at how, I mean, sometimes you show movies like this can be done and they feel like, okay, this was done with a certain kind of like, okay, we're going to tell the story. But there's such an intelligence and complexity to the film that you bring to it as a filmmaker that I was very happy to see and impressed to enjoy in a film like this. Because it can easily be just a B movie that gets done. And, Nicolas Cage has done so many of those kinds of films that go straight to either DVD or B. But this one has a level of... a level of artistry that you don't normally get with these kinds of films. And so I think you've done his story really proud, Lovecraft's story.
Huge fan of the man. I mean, I think Color Out of Space is a B movie. It's just a very colourful one.
Fair.
I think it was Roberto
well,
Rodriguez.
I think you're elevating it. Then
it's
maybe.
Roberto Rodriguez who says if the dog dies that it's a B movie. So, okay. spoiler alert. And obviously the basic issue of the meteor hitting the farm and the setup of the thing, the scientists, the sheriff, etc., the town mayor, is dealing with B movie archetypes. But there are a huge number of different layers in there. I mean, with the family thing, filming, I was dealing with my mum's death from cancer, which comes
Okay.
back through through Jolie's character.
Right.
Nick was dealing with his own dad. A lot of Nick's performance is based on August Coppola, his father.
Yeah.
And so we were digging pretty deep into the family dynamic and the issues of death, of losing one's loved ones, and try to come to terms with that.
Well, the deterioration physically matches the deterioration emotionally and mentally going on between the family members as well. Jolie's deterioration physically matching what's happening there with her own family. I mean, I lost my dad to cancer in 2008, so I've been through that process, and there were certainly moments within the movie where I was like, oh, yeah, I remember that. I remember having that conversation or hearing those words and things of that nature. So I think you captured, I think that's what gives the film a little more weight than would normally be there in a story like this. There are more stakes, not just from the reaction to the asteroid, but the stakes that are already inherent within this family. I love
Totally.
that.
I mean, I read my mum H.P. Lovecraft on her deathbed. It went full circle.
Yeah.
Before she passed, she was aware that we were trying to make this movie, but she didn't believe we'd pull it off. She was very darkly cynical right to the end. It'll all come to nothing. It'll all come to nothing. It all spirals down to nothing. It's like, no, Mom, we're going to do it.
Have some faith, Mom.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back with you, man. You were born in South Africa, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Was that like? How did you get into film? What was your process in discovering movies and your love of movies?
Well, I put that all down to my dad, who brought home a 60mm print of King Kong when I was 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
Which was just the biggest thing that ever happened to me. They didn't have television in South Africa at that point, so King Kong was the first time I'd seen a moving image, and that hit me very hard. And I think as much as the image of the big ape on the Empire State Building, it was the crazy filmmaker Carl Denham's desire to go somewhere where no one had ever been before, to bring back something no one had ever seen before, that grabbed me as a child and made me realize I wanted to do that with my life.
Oh, wow. Have you always, like, since from that moment where you just kind of like, films were always a part of your life and always like something you pursued and explored?
Yeah, since very young. I initially started making sort of anamorphic or 185 crayon drawings, taping them together and keeping them on rolls when I was still a kid, which were sort of early attempts at that. Then graduated on to Super 8 and spent a lot of time, like a lot of kids, mucking around with stop motion animation and building little miniature sets and doing glass paintings and things and trying to recreate the world in one's garage. And then at some point I realized you have to have human beings involved in that process.
Yeah, they can speak.
Yeah, for a time I was about 12 or 13. I started coercing my friends into dressing up as cavemen, or started putting human beings into the Super 8 movies.
Wow. Fascinating. Oh, so then do you go to like what happens? Do you go to college? How do you keep pursuing this as your passion?
Well, at that time there was no formal film education in South Africa.
Okay.
So it was tricky. When I was at college, I did find a film class, which was kind of an informal filmmakers workshop that happened like one afternoon a week, and we borrowed their equipment, me and one other kid, and went and shot a caveman epic, which took us about 6 months to shoot. And when we showed it to the film tutors, they completely freaked out, expelled both of us, and confiscated the footage. It took about 2 years to get back most of the Super 8 footage, put it back together again, and then submit the thing, which was a short film called Rites of Passage that eventually won a student film trophy in London up against work from the National Film School in Beaconsfield and from UCLA and stuff. So that gave us the encouragement we needed. We thought, okay, we can do this, even though we're not coming out of a major film school, or there's no one really backing us. The work still speaks for itself. In South Africa, we were using the landscape and the animals. So we had the beauty of being able to make, even as 13-year-olds, a prehistoric movie which which happens to feature rail baboons and rail leopards and a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally have access to.
Interesting. It comes in handy
when
you're down
indeed,
there. Wow.
So it was tailored to what was freely available to us as kids.
Interesting. What were your parents' reactions to this when you wanted to pursue it? You just spoke about your mom being like, "Oh, this will never happen." Were your parents like against this, or were they encouraging you as a filmmaker?
My mum was reasonably supportive after she got over her initial desire that I should join the army.
Oh, wow.
Which was the initial impetus of my family. They wanted me to fulfill the family tradition. And,
really? You come from a family of military?
And go into the military, yeah. My mum's a survivor of the Blitz and World War II and stuff, so they've got a sort of strict idea of what they think a hero should be or whatever. So there was obviously a collision when she realized that she'd raised a long-haired, camera-wielding, dope-smoking liberal instead.
Well, I'm sure she didn't turn out the way her parents thought she would turn out either. So that's how it goes. That's the cycle. Are they British? Is that why they survived the Blitz? And then they moved to South Africa?
Yeah, my mom was British. She, in fact, moved initially to what was then Rhodesia. Right. She moved in the early 1950s and went to Bulawayo in Rhodesia solely because it had the word away in it.
Yeah.
She simply picked it off the map because it was sufficiently far away from austerity-era England that she could start a new life, and I don't think she knew much about the place.
Interesting. All right, so you get this recognition for the student film. How do you find yourself with hardware? How do you find yourself in front of Weinstein? How does this happen for you?
Series of lucky breaks. The success of the initial short film encouraged me to go to England. Plus, I got drafted when I was 16 into the Angolan Bush War in South Africa, which basically forced me to deal with a bunch of issues, which was the point where I decided I didn't want to support it, that I have nothing against Angolans, and no one could explain to me why we're supposed to kill Angolans.
You were fighting in this war?
I was supposed to, yeah.
Oh, you were supposed to.
Into it, but,
okay.
At some point, once I had to face up to the reality of that, I decided I didn't want to do it. So I became an official deserter and deserted the South African army and made a run for it. Got across the border into Namibia, caught a plane to Germany. Germany's got historic connections of Namibia, which is the former German West Africa.
Right.
And then found my way down the Rhine, ended up in Amsterdam in the mid-'80s and discovered what the real world was like. And so found myself at a place where there was great art, great theatre, legalized soft drugs, and where great music. And suddenly realized what I'd been missing growing up in the police state. Then I got across the water, managed to get political asylum in England, which was easier to do then than it is now. And for the first 2 years, did any job I could. I wasn't really working legally, so I was forced to do cash in hand jobs.
Under the table.
Short order cook, kitchen porter, the photocopy boy at the Soviet press agency. I did a bunch of crazy things for 2 years, and kept shooting Super 8 stuff in the meantime, and often home processing. And that then led to a music video job. We finally did a music video for a band that didn't have a record deal and wanted some way of promoting themselves. They turned out to be a bunch called the Fields of the Nephilim, who were who grew up into being quite a force to be reckoned with, and we were lucky to get involved with them. Ended up doing their first music videos, their first album covers, and that then brought me into the music business. And then very quickly ended up getting larger projects, doing work for John Lydon and Public Image Limited, and from there onwards, things started to roll, which led to hardware. Hardware is deliberately very close to some of the music videos we were doing, so we were able to use the videos as kind of proof of concept.
Yeah, I remember watching Hardware the first, because I was into the independent stuff back in the 90s. I was watching everything I get my hands on. Remember, this Hardware thing was like this exotic thing that you had to find and you had to watch. And I remember watching it, and I just was blown away by this. So when you were, when they announced you for Moreau, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is going to be great, because I was a fan of the Michael York one, the Crazy 70s one that Michael York was in, and I'm like, oh, I want to see what this director Richard Stanley is going to do with this, and I remember being a bit disappointed, obviously because Frankenheimer came in and kind of changed the vibe a bit, and then watching the documentary, though, that's where my mind went back. So it makes sense that the doors opened back up for you, because my mind changed as well. Like, oh, this is what he'd had. This is the vision he was going for. These were the obstacles he had to overcome. What was I know we don't have too much more time. It's like 15 minutes left, but like, what was the process for you? Like, now looking back now in retrospect, right, 20 years later, what do you take from that experience, if anything?
Well, I think I've become a better person, probably.
Oh.
Slowly. Dr. Moreau got me out of the film industry for a while.
Yeah.
And forced me to go off into the world. I imagine if I had stayed in the industry from Dr. Moreau, I would have felt the desire to make bigger and bigger movies from Moreau onwards. And given what might not have happened over the course of those 20 years, I'm fairly glad that I bowed out at that point, and that coming in at this point, I've got I think a deeper insight into what matters in this world.
Right. A different point of view, more perspective maybe, yeah?
Yeah, I'd still like to do Moreau if the opportunity arises.
Don't joke, right? Because I would love to see your finished version of Moreau.
It's been battered around.
Really?
Obviously, it's public domain, like Color Out of Space, so anyone can have a run at Moreau. But at the same time, it's huge because it involves recreating the island and the Beast People. But I also believe very firmly at this stage that if the material ever manages to get rebooted, it should be rebooted as a television series rather than a movie, because I think one of the problems with the last run at it was creating and designing so many creatures for a single movie. It makes almost no sense, because there's just not enough screen time to be able to give enough air to all of those creations and to the whole world that they're living in.
And it's not like a franchise, because like you have that with Planet of the Apes, you create those characters, you CG those characters, but they carry on through a trilogy, whereas Moreau is really a singular story. But you could absolutely create a TV series out of Moreau because of all the dynamics involved between the characters and the conversions of people into these animals. That would be fascinating, I think.
Yeah, and the original Wells book's very much drawing on the Robinson Crusoe tradition. So the unfortunate castaway in the book is trapped on the island for years, rather than just a couple of days like in the movie version. So, I would like to do an extended Crusoe Papillon type ordeal for the castaway, who really should become more like an animal than a person by the end, in that if you're living with the Beast People all that time, it's difficult not to take on their characteristics.
Right.
And,
there's a symbolism in that as well, wouldn't you say? I mean, you could connect it to anything. The more you become part of how can I say this? The more you become part of a group, the more you become part of a philosophy or a thought process, then you are a completely different person from when you first started hearing it to by the end when you're a full disciple of it. That would be something to explore, certainly, with allusions to our world nowadays, if you could get that off.
Totally. In the back of my mind, I see the poorly spelled words painted on the wall on the island saying, "Make the island great again."
I'm down. Yeah, it could be. That could work. Absolutely. What did you do in that time that like changed you and like brought you a different perspective? What did you explore? What did you end up doing with your time?
Well, crazily enough, went looking for the Holy Grail.
There was the documentary, right?
That's
Is that right?
Yeah. There's at least by now 2 documentaries that I've made, and then I've also appeared in 3 or 4 other documentaries for the History Channel and different folk on the subject. And I went down that path, which led me to, and I ended up living on a mountain in the Pyrenees, on the mountain of Montsegur, where I became the only English-speaking mountain guide for the area for a bunch of years.
So you were leading people around the mountain and things of that nature?
For about 11 years, I was primarily supporting myself from taking people up into the mountain and devoting myself pretty much full-time to trying to back-engineer the history of the place and translate as much as I could into English, and to basically retrieve as much of the data that was destroyed by the 7 centuries of the Inquisition, and that came after they conquered the place. There was a big attempt to rewrite history by the Holy Roman Church and the Inquisition, who controlled all data from the sort of the 13th century onwards. So there's I wanted to try and redress that balance by putting as much of the forbidden or hidden history back into circulation on the internet, just as a sort of general service to the heretics.
Like a pushback. Were you writing scripts during this time, or did you completely walk away from filmmaking mentally?
There was a while when I completely walked away, but then I found myself getting more involved in writing scripts. People kept seeking me out.
Yeah.
And I ended up doing a bunch of script writing duties on different bizarre European movies. Most of them are lost in time now, but some of them turned out good.
Okay.
Particularly a movie called Replace from about a year ago, which is a German near-future sort of skin vampire movie made by a man named Norbert Kiel, and I'm quite keen on Replace.
Really?
I think I like the movie. I think that I would have made it more violent had I directed it myself. But
interesting.
I think that one of all the scripts I wrote during that period turned out quite good on the screen. I hope Norbert finds a distribution deal.
I'm going to make Oh, it's not out yet. It's not out yet.
I don't think it's been theatrically distributed in the States.
I was going to say, I'm going to go find that thing.
If you search on YouTube, you'll be able to find a trailer for it. And stars Barbara Crampton from the original
Reanimator.
Stuart Gordon movies.
Yeah.
And I also turn up as a fish person in Dagon, which was shot in Galicia.
Interesting.
During that period. So.
All right. Okay, so with Color Out of Space, because I think this is a fantastic film. I really do enjoy the hell out of it, and the cinematography is incredible in this thing as well. What are you looking at next? Is there something else you've got a project that you're looking at, or you're working on? Or are you just want to kind of live in this experience now, and then the next project will present itself to you?
Well, I guess the strongest project will rise to the surface in a sort of Darwinian way, because most of them are out of my control.
Okay.
A great many of them are frozen at various stages of development, but are still alive, like Dr. Moreau. There's still some electrochemical activity in the hyena swine's brain, despite Frankenheimer pumping 1,000 armor-plated rounds into the thing. It's still not dead. May somehow find a way of rebooting itself. The hardware franchise is in a similar position after the collapse of Miramax. It was the rights were broken up between MGM holds some rights, Buena Vista holds some rights, etc. I don't have control over it. I would dearly love to go back into that soup and reboot the hardware franchise. I'd love to revisit the Mark 13 droid if I had the opportunity.
I'm down with that. That'd be great.
I'm totally encouraging that to happen. Otherwise, based on the last 10 years, I think I have a potentially great medieval movie, and if anyone ever allows me to do sword and sorcery, I would dearly love to do that. It's a step away from my normal genre, but I also think I have it in me.
I would say you have it in you, yeah. I'm just looking at you and then just our conversation. I would absolutely say you have it within you. And that interest in that kind of stuff is coming back. We see it on the History Channel. We see, I think the show Nightfall, and then obviously Games of Thrones has echoes of Middle Ages stuff, medieval stuff. So that's certainly there.
Yeah, Game of Thrones, I think, is still the most popular TV show of all time at this stage. And I thought that certainly with their Battle of the Bastards sequence, they probably had the greatest medieval battle sequence I've seen. I thought they trumped Lord of the Rings.
Oh, absolutely.
It sets a very high bar, but I think there's a lot to be done in the world of adult high fantasy.
Wow.
If we can step away from it being PG and actually go R-rated.
Yeah, would that excite you if you would ever get a series on something like Showtime or HBO or Cinemax or whatever, and you could actually be allowed to make your version of the series R-rated and explore the more harder edges of this world?
I would love to.
Yeah,
it's something out. I definitely think there's some room to move in there, and I've realized that, as I've intimated before, there's a lot of stuff about our history which is just plain wrong, and a lot of things that went on back in the past that to me are unbelievable when I go back and do the research. So I would love to get in there. Mostly, I'd like to just change things around and try to tell the stories of some of the pagans, witches, and heretics who were basically treated extremely badly by the Holy Roman Church and others. And there's any number of unsung heroes and extraordinary situations that were overlooked by the historians as a result of them dealing with people who are effectively on the wrong side, who went. Who made the early settlers in America at Merrymount, who were led by a shaman stand figure who was eventually displaced by the Puritans who, under Miles Standish, who were forced to attack them and cut down their maypole and take their shaman away and stuff. And I'd kind of like to turn things around and replay that bit of history seen from the opposite point of view, with the Puritans not as the good guys for a change. And,
that would be nice.
Yeah.
And certainly and we've seen this all over the world now, and certainly in this country, as people are starting to believe less and less, you could say that, with God and religion and the church, and be more about believing in themselves and the actual things that are around them. The door opens up more so to explore the terrible history that some religions and some institutions have had throughout the history of time, not just in this country, but in many countries. That would be something, absolutely.
Yeah, I just think, as with Lavinia's character in the movie, who is an unusually positive portrayal of a goth Wiccan character,
yes,
I would like to see things redressed slightly, and some of those issues publicly interrogated or re-examined. Otherwise, colour certainly clears the way for further Lovecraft adaptations, and I hope these don't just come from me. I would very much still like to see, say, Del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness,
yes,
or James Wan's Call of Cthulhu. So I hope that colour's success in its limited way is going to maybe encourage other people to go into that territory.
That'd be great.
And certainly I'm not averse to the idea of going back there myself. And, I'd love to see more of Arkham, and I would love to see the Miskatonic University, the setting from Reanimator, revisited.
Reanimator's the one that did it for me.
Yeah.
At that age, I think it was 15 or 16 when that came out. I remember renting it on VHS and I was like, who is Jeffrey Combs? What is this all about? And you just, you can't never get Reanimator out of your head after you watch. Even so, Beyond Reanimator, whatever was the second one that was, or what, I think it was Bride of Reanimator, whatever it was. There was and I watched those because I was like, I couldn't get enough. And I'm not your typical horror crazy, fan, but there was something about Reanimator that just spoke to me at that age, and I remember just being in love with it. That'd be great to open that door up again.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see what Miskatonic University is like on campus in the 21st century.
That's a good point. One last thing, I know we got to wrap up here in the next couple of minutes. Are there filmmakers that you watch, that you keep tabs on, that you're excited, whose work you respect and admire, that are working nowadays?
Yeah, I think we're living in a very good time for movies, crazily enough, and we're particularly living in a good time for genre. There's more decent horror and sci-fi material out there now than pretty much any time I can remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I think last year there were over 700 horror movies released last year, which is insane. It's more movies than even I can keep track of. And out of that, we're seeing genuinely good work.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been absolutely delighted with Ari Aster's work. And, out of this year, obviously, we're films like Midsummer, and I'm also a big fan of Lighthouse. And
you've seen The Lighthouse?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Okay. So,
okay.
I think we've got good people who are turning out genuinely decent and thought-provoking horror material.
Yeah, because I imagine it must have felt like, with your approach to horror, at times you felt almost singular. And now you're seeing people having these new and distinct and unique approaches to this genre that really find a way to help the genre breathe and stay alive and attract viewers into watching it, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm very pleased to see that the films and the folk I've just mentioned all have a very high technical standard and have one foot maybe in the art house, which is something that's always been the case of myself. I mean, color displays a deranged sort of Terrence Malick influence, which...
Hey, I go see every Malick movie opening weekend. I still go. I know it's all stream of consciousness now, but you can't deny the man's talent as a filmmaker. It's just, he takes you on a journey.
Always been one of my favorite people, even if my favorite of his films has always been his first one. I still love Badlands.
Oh, Badlands is badass, still. I have that Criterion one. I watch it all the time. Days of Heaven still works for me as well.
I absolutely loved and adored that when I first saw it. I think I saw it as a 13-year-old when it first came out, and it's a weird movie for a 13-year-old boy to fall in love with, but I went back to it time and again.
Well, that's what tells you were a cinephile even at a young age. When it bites us, it bites us. There's no way out. I mean, once you get bit by that, there's so much that you all of a sudden see that you don't understand why other people can't see what you're seeing, and that makes the difference. And certainly your films are that way too, Richard. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to stop by to talk to me here on the Deep Cut, and I'm only sad that we only had this limited amount of time, because I could speak with you for another 2 hours about your journey and about your life.
There's plenty more, but yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully I can have you back again.
I'd love to do that, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there you go. Richard Stanley, he is the director of this new film, Color Out of Space. It is there for you to enjoy and watch. Trust me, this is a good use of your time, and you'll come out of this thing reappreciating Richard Stanley as a director again. Thanks, Richard.
I'd like to hope you'd come out of it reappreciating one's own position in the cosmos.
Well, yeah, what else would you do coming out of a Richard Stanley movie? That's for damn sure. All right, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of The Deep Cut. I'll end it like I ended every episode. Whatever you need to do to get you through the next second, next minute, next hour, next day, next year, get to it, because you never know what is waiting for you on the other side. And if Richard Stanley isn't a great example of that, I don't know what is. A terrible situation that somehow brought him back to filmmaking 20 years later and creating an incredible film like Color Out of Space. All right, we'll talk to you next time on The Deep Cut. Take care.